an awesome season, man. They found their quarterback last year in C.J. Stroud. They made the big trade up for Will Anderson. He looked great as a rookie, as expected. And we head into the next steps here. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn when I ran into Nick Caserio on the sideline at the Senior Bowl. Said, hey, good season, blah, 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 whatever. And he said something to the effect of, hey, now it gets difficult. I don't think I'm giving away any trade secrets or anything like that.
It's a very blurry line, this whole on the record, off the record thing.
Yeah. I mean, now if he listens to the show, he might be mad.
Yeah.
But all he said, he just said, hey, and now the work really begins, right? Because now you're the defending AFC South champion. How hard could it be? And they're all gunning for you in the AFC South. And there's a little bit of turnover. You've got free agents like Dalton Schultz at tight end, Jonathan Grenard, who's one of the better edge defenders to hit free agency that we keep giving to other teams. So you've got Steven Nelson at corner. So what are your thoughts on the Texans and where we are right now?
Well, I think they showed how quickly you can propel yourself forward from being terrible to being pretty good if you just get a couple of things right? You find a QB and you find coaches, and then you're in business. Obviously, D'Amico Ryans is staying there long term, but they gave Bobby Slowick a raise. So Bobby's staying around, right? Funny how that works. You dramatically exceed expectations, you get more money. So Bobby's staying in the building. The D'Amico Ryans is staying there. And C.J. Stroud is outstanding based off his rookie year. So that's the core. That's the thing you want in the building, and they've still got it.
We've radically exceeded expectations, Sam.
By certain measures.
Yeah. We've gone above and beyond. We've done everything we've been asked to do. Just throwing that out there. I mean, I think, look, if we rewind it a little bit with Houston, and when we say fixing every team, we like to talk about how we got here and just give some options and just talk about the team. We're not literally going to fix every last hole on the team in our 20-minute conversation. But go back to the early Nick Caserio takeover, and they didn't know what they were going to do with Deshaun Watson yet, and we said they're not making a lot of long-term moves.
Right.
But I do think that they were making those culture plays, right? They were getting guys 30 through 50 on the roster. There was a lot of additions there and trying to get the culture in order. And then they didn't start making aggressive moves until they had some draft capital and they got Derek Stingley in the first round and Jalen Petrie and Kendrick Green. But also, one of the biggest moves that they made was the trade up to go get Nico Collins a couple of years ago. And I think we're starting to get, some justification for this front office in some of their player evals. I think it was a slow going, but I think Nico Collins breaking out and becoming a #1 type wide receiver. I mean, I know there's some Nico Collins fans out there, but I don't know if anybody was expecting that type of production from him. You add Tank Dell and what he was able to do as a mid-round draft pick. I mean, there are a lot of hits, so to speak, now looking back over the last couple of years for the Texans and Nick Caserio.
Yeah, and you have to wonder, how much of that is just nailing the C.J. Stroud thing. How much does C.J. Stroud on his own transform Nico Collins and Tank Dell? What happens to them if you replace Stroud with just somebody random? Collins, to be fair, was already heading in that direction, albeit this was a massive jump forward. But he was at least improving. He was on a lot of breakout player type watch lists, before last season. So I don't think you can say it's all him. And obviously, a lot of people love Tank Dell coming into the draft, but they've nailed a lot of these really important decisions. And interestingly, they've done it in an unusual way. They haven't necessarily, you see certain teams, you can see very clearly, there's an athletic trait, list that they're sticking to, or they have a type, right? Texans don't appear to have a type. I mean, that's one thing that's, I think, fair. The consistency of their decision making is that they have no consistency. It's just they like players and they grab these players, and the strike rate on them has been pretty good so far. Yeah,
they have done a nice job there. So as far as things that need to be looked at this offseason, I mentioned Jonathan Grenard. Let's start on the offense, actually. Dalton Schultz, they just signed him to a 1-year deal last year, got good tight end production out of him, and probably have to figure out what they want to do at that position going forward. Noah Brown is a free agent. He was a nice #3 for a whole bunch. There was a stretch in the middle of the season where he looked like former 5-star Noah Brown. I don't think it's a massive loss. I think with Tank Dell coming back from injury, Xavier Hutchinson as a rookie last year, John Mechie, they probably have enough depth there, but adding another weapon I think is always good. And then the offensive line, George Fant hits free agency, and it's still a line that on paper doesn't look great, but they they did well. I mean, it's a lot like the Niners, where the on-paper list and the turnover, at least that Houston had, wasn't great, but they made it work, and maybe it's the scheme certainly helping them.
Well, step one in the offseason is always like, who of your own free agents, your own guys that are scheduled to hit free agency, which ones are you bringing back? The Texans have a lot of cap space, so they're in the fortuitous position, I guess, where they could bring back all of the ones they wanted to bring back if they want to do it. The question is, like, which ones do they want to bring back? Like, if you were looking at their list,
Grenard.
Yeah, you would say they probably want to bring back Grenard, Blake Cashman, linebacker, had an incredible season, breakout year this year. Probably Steven Nelson, Dalton Schultz, maybe Devin Singletary in the backfield, given how he played. Maybe Noah Brown, as you said, though. I think they could sort of replace him from lower on the depth chart. But those are quite useful players, all of whom I think were pretty important for them this season. And they could easily bring them all back if they wanted to. They have that kind of money. Steven
Nelson always feels like one of these very underrated players who is just solid across the board, dependable, plays his 1,000 snaps, and is a good corner. He's not a shutdown corner. He's a good complementary corner. But using PFF WAR, Steven Nelson's been a top 32 corner in 4 out of the last 5 years, including 19th last year in WAR, in part because he's out there and durable and if you could bring him back again in that, $6, $7, $8 million range, I feel like that is worth it, especially pairing him with Derek Stingley, who had a really nice breakout last year, the former number 3 overall pick in his second season. Their defense started to play a lot better, and I do wonder if they have to go keep Jonathan Grenard there and continue to invest in the defensive line. The whole tree of former 49ers defensive coaches, from Robert Saleh to DeMeco Ryans, I think part of it's tactically, like, they like to have 6 to 8 legitimate defensive linemen. Who doesn't? But I do wonder if this is a year to attack that position, or the entire unit.
I mean, even if they bring back Grenard, I think they could absolutely still bolster it in free agency and go after some of those guys that we talked about that might only be 1 year, 10 million type players, but could absolutely add 45, 50 pressures to your team over the course of the season. And certainly if they lose Grenard, then I would imagine they attack free agency fairly hard and try and upgrade given what they lost. Like, they would be a team in the Bryce Huff conversation of, this is a guy that can be an elite pass rusher and maybe can play more than he was playing with the Jets.
Would you double up there? You're saying potentially Grenard and Huff?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think
Will Anderson.
I don't think that would be crazy. Even if they lost Grenard, I think going after Bryce Huff would make a lot of sense. Even if they bring Grenard back, I wouldn't hate Bryce Huff, but maybe if they brought him back, they would be looking a little bit lower down the price range, and instead going after, I don't know, who would they potentially target? Like somebody like Darrell Taylor, or someone like that.
Taylor's a pretty good one-trick type of guy. Just get after the quarterback, and he can make some plays there. He's struggled against the run. I would like to see Darrell Taylor, former Seahawk, as just a pass rush specialist, as an edge 3 rather than a starter. So that could be a nice fit, if Grenard's back.
I'd also be really curious what Andrew Van Ginkel's free agent market looks like. I mean, he's a guy that's been like a sort of solid player for years and then randomly became one of the best pass rushers in the NFL this season.
Does he get pigeonholed in like I don't want to say a 3-4 outside backer role, but like a stand-up role? Teams that are more likely to use a stand-up guy, or guy that's going to drop into coverage a little bit. I don't know if that limits his market just a little bit. But Van Ginkel's been very, very good.
Yeah, and for a guy that you sort of anticipate being something of a situational rusher, I think that's less important. Like, just go line up in the designated gap and rush. It doesn't matter. I don't care whether you're doing it from a 2 or a 3 point stance.
The other thing I wanted to highlight, right tackle as an opening. Do they bring back George Fant? He's another one of those guys whose career started slow, but he's crept back toward average, I think, as a tackle. But there's still a potential upgrade there. Is Jonah Williams a potential good fit there to bring him in? I wonder if Jonah's going to try to get back to the left side after playing on the right side last year in Cincinnati, in his last year there. Titus Howard's still on the roster in there, but I do think they need some depth up front on the O-line. That takes me to the draft. They're picking 8 times, and their first pick is at 23. That's Cleveland's pick. Remember, so the Texans don't have their first-round pick. This was the reason why everything we brought up about the Will Anderson trade. I know they have this extra pick, but they would have also had pick 27. That's why when you're doing the math, so to speak, on the Will Anderson trade, it was the pick that they had at 12 last year, that pick at the beginning of the second round, plus this pick, which ends up being number 27. And you're weighing kind of those three players against Will Anderson. But the Texans still have pick 23. They still have 3 picks in the top 85.
The fact that they have that Browns pick actually is probably a very under-discussed element of everything they did last year.
Of why they did it.
Yeah. Like, how much does that weigh? Hey, like, no matter what, we're still going to have a first-round draft pick. like whether the one we're giving away ends up being number 2 overall or number 30 overall, we're still going to have a first-round pick.
Right.
Either way. That's probably a big element, or at least in the equation, of why they decided to make that move.
I'm sure it was. I mean, that's why when teams, and I'm not sure it's the right line of thinking or not,
right,
but teams do that all the time. Like when they get a comp pick,
seen as has money.
Yes, when they get a comp pick, they're like, "Oh, we shouldn't have had this. That's
right,
a comp pick. This is extra. We'll trade it." It's a free pick, but it's like you also could use it or whatever. It's not free. You've earned it by giving something up. That's why it's a comp
maybe
pick.
I'm just projecting. Maybe everyone else has been bringing this up every time it's come up, but I certainly haven't really talked about it here. And yet it is probably a really important element of why they made that decision.
So I would say no matter what happens with, say, Steven Nelson in the second cornerback spot, another team that I think the cornerback depth or the first-round talent at corner could benefit them
it's the right
at pick 23.
Well.
It's what?
It's the right area, pick 23 for a corner. I think for a corner run to get a guy like that.
They could also be in the O-line market in that first round. Do you want to draft your future right tackle?
Well, they're one of these Shanahan teams, right, that always seems to have a boost in the offensive line, but at some point you have to then evaluate, well, how much do we want to invest in the offensive line given this, right? Given this Bobby Slowick version of the Shanahan offense seems to have an effect on the offensive line the way Kyle Shanahan's does, the way a lot of these other versions do. Does that mean we completely ignore it, or do we still actually want to improve the baseline personnel on that group?
I mean, they did spend pick 14 a couple of years ago on Kendrick Green at guard, so I think they are willing to.
And they've got Laramie Tunsil. Like, it's not like there's no investment or anything in there, but I'm just saying, you could look at that group from a year ago and say it's fine. We'll do the usual maintenance, tick over, turnover of bodies, but we don't need to invest heavily in the offensive line because we have this Shanahan system.
Well, either way, I like the way Houston's trending. Of course, as you said before, it all starts with C.J. Stroud getting Bobby locked up. So you've got that synergy there. Very promising year for Nico Collins plus Tank Dell. Would love to see some added depth at receiver. How about tight end options? I don't know if we want to discuss that a little bit. If they do go to the draft, it's Brock Bowers and friends. A lot of people do like Jatavian Sanders from Texas, as I've seen him mocked in the late first before. The caveat, of course, there will literally be at least 100 players. If you look, there will be at least 100 players who have their name in a first-round mock draft. But Sanders could be a good second-round type of option, very good after the catch, and he could be a nice addition to this offense. I mean, let's just litter it with playmakers, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they did the hard part. They got the quarterback right, apparently, and coaching right. So now let's try and make it as good as you can get it.
All right, Houston Texans, are they fixed?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest part that they need to do is just bring back all the guys they have that they want to keep. They've got a lot of good players hitting free agency. They've got a lot of not good players hitting free agency. So bring back the ones that are good. You've got the money to spend. The guys we listed out, Grenard, Cashman, maybe Steven Nelson, maybe, pick a few. Supplement that with veterans and free agency without going crazy. I don't think they need to be shopping at the top of the market, and then have a good draft. I mean, they've got picks. They've got the first rounder, second, third, 2 fourths, and then a bunch of seventh rounders, and that's it. It's one of the easier ones, I think, simpler fixes.
Texans fixed.